Anthony Richardson is bound to be a fantasy star with his elite mobility, but if you want to roster him in this season, you'll have to pay up. We discuss if Richardson is worth his draft cost, plus hit on the rest of the Colts players' fantasy outlook on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first team every day. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. I'm not doing this. I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. We're still going through our 32 teams, each team getting their own episode to just dig through their entire 2024 fantasy outlook. And we're on to the AFC South. We started with the Texans last Friday. We're moving on to the Colts now, and they're an exciting team with a lot of question marks. Last year, we didn't really get to see their rookie quarterback in Anthony Richardson. He only played 2 full games, only started 4 games. But when he was out there, he really showed flashes of being an elite fantasy quarterback. And then they re-signed Michael Pittman, who had a career year last year. They drafted a wide receiver in the second round in A.D. Mitchell. Really, the only thing different here is they lost Zach Moss, but he was up running back by the end of the season with Jonathan Taylor taking back over that backfield once he got healthy. So this is a really fun offense, especially with Shane Steichen there. He knows how to get an offense going and how to get quarterbacks going, especially. So let's hit on Anthony Richardson because right now he is going quarterback 6, sometimes as high as quarterback 5 in some drafts. 48th overall is his average draft position. He's so fresh and he was so good last year, right? In the minimal time we got to see him for fantasy anyways, but are you risking that type of cost on a player that's we just don't know?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question because, again, things were great in his rookie season, but he had that shoulder injury that put him on the shelf for good. Then he had missed another game with a concussion. So there were some durability issues right away, right? And we're trying to sort those out and see if we can trust him to stay on the field. But then we know what a dynamic dual threat he can be. We know he's working with Shane Steichen, who helped Jalen Hurts develop into an elite fantasy quarterback. What we saw with Jalen Hurts in year 2, he got the running down. And then he took that to another level with big-time passing in year 3 and made the jump from just a top 12, top 6 quarterback to one of the best in the game that we're going to draft highly probably here on out. So Shane Steichen is really good at getting the most out of the mobile quarterbacks. That's the reason they hired him here, knowing that they were headed to get a Richardson type here in this offense. Now, it seems very expensive at the moment, but you look at Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson. Those are the 4 that are going to go ahead of most people in most leagues. And then you have C.J. Stroud and Anthony Richardson. I think, as we talked about Stroud in our previous show, I think Richardson is a much better value here because he has that top upside because of the running. I mean, Allen and Hurts are up there because of running, and Richardson, that's a big part of his game. He has the traits of those 2 guys, right? He's a pretty tough runner, and he has a big arm and to throw downfield. He's got another weapon here in A.D. Mitchell. We'll see how it plays out with him and Alec Pierce battling for that threat here with Josh Downs and Michael Pittman and their tight ends. But again, you don't need a lot of passing to get the numbers from Richardson because, again, those rushing yards really add up. There's some comparisons that can be made to Lamar Jackson. So you might be glossing on Allen or Hurts or Jackson, but in relation to those type of quarterbacks, I think it's a better value where you're not getting that necessarily with Mahomes or Stroud or Burrow, where you're not getting that rushing element to kind of pad those stats. So I really like his value actually better, even though it's pretty high. It still seems pretty high than what you can get with Mahomes or Stroud or Joe Burrow behind him.
Yeah, I'm actually okay with his cost. It's really, really risky because we've seen such a small sample size. But in the 2 full games he did play, he was a quarterback 4 in both of those weeks. Finished with 29 fantasy points, or sorry, 21 fantasy points in week 1, 29 in week 4. And then in week 2, he played only 18 snaps and still scored nearly 18 fantasy points. And then in his 4th game he started, he was out like immediately. So, and wasn't doing much before he went out. But Richardson was, a lot of that had to do with the legs, like you brought up, but also the rushing touchdowns. He was the first quarterback all time to score 4 or more rushing touchdowns over his first three career games. So maybe those die down because we don't know how like consistent those can be, but they're still going to be there, right? Jonathan Taylor's not going to get everything around the goal line. He will get a lot, but Richardson will, I think he's going to be a lot like Josh Allen in that way, where it's just like every year he's going to have 8 to 10 rushing touchdowns and it's never going to surprise us. So, and I think a big part of this is trusting him is the Shane Steichen piece, right? Justin Herbert had his career high passer rating season with Steichen, and that was as a rookie. And we know Jalen Hurts broke out with Steichen, and then once he was gone, it wasn't as good anymore. So I do think that's a huge part of this. And if you want to be risky, I'm actually okay with his cost at 48th overall. I think you and I, our biggest issue with his cost is that you can get Jaden Daniels like 6 rounds later, and they're kind of the same type of player with nearly identical experience because, again, we've seen Richardson play 2 full games.
Yeah, it's how low do you want to go? Do you want to go to that tier of Allen Hurts and Jackson for the running quarterback? Do you want to feel like the sweet spot is Richardson, or do you want to be a little bit more risky and go with Daniels? I don't know if there's anyone out there. Like, I don't think Caleb Williams is technically a running quarterback, but he could be a value that you're looking at as a young quarterback, right? In relation to the Stroud Richardson tier, you might be waiting to try to see if you can tap into Williams or Daniels there. So when I look at this, he's a targeted guy, and I said he might be a 5th round target, but now his ranking is kind of in the 4th round. I think you're going to have to be more aggressive to get him, but if you could get him in the 5th, I think that's a really good pick. That's how I kind of had it. I mean, he made my list of guys I want to target in every draft. If I look at Richardson, I look at also Dalton Kincaid. I don't know if both of these guys are going to be around in that 4, 5, 6 range where I really want their values to be, so I can feel much better about my 1st, 2nd, 3rd round pick, because I don't want to use a quarterback pick early anyway. So for my philosophy, I think when I start looking at quarterbacks, it's usually not when the top guys are on the board, it's around this tier. And I see him standing out. I know there's some other values. You might say, okay, wait for Jordan Love or Dak Prescott, but again, the Richardson running and also the scoring. Keep in mind, he's got some of that Jalen Hurts scoring. He's got some of that arm of Allen. He's kind of got some Jackson qualities as well. So this is kind of a cheaper, younger package. The only question is, do you trust him here in year 2? And do you trust him to stay healthy? Are you going to get all those games you need out of him? Well, I think he'll probably take care of his body better. But again, running quarterbacks also come with that risk a little bit more. Again, you can get hurt in the pocket as well. That's where Lamar did a couple of years ago. But I just taking those hits and the concussion thing, he's got to play a little bit smarter here to stay on the field where I really want to trust him. But then it all comes back to, okay, QB6, still pretty good. I think you look at the Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry situation, great running quarterback with great runner. You have that here too. And looking at that with Jonathan Taylor. So that's always going to help his value.
And what's interesting is if Anthony Richardson does go down, you're going to be able to get Joe Flacco off the waiver wires. I mean, you would have to fight for him probably, but after last year, what he did in Cleveland, I know Joe Flacco has never been like the most like consistent fantasy player, but after last year, you never know, especially with Shane Steichen in this offense. He might just be throwing it up again, Hail Mary throws, and you can just pick him up while Richardson is out. So he definitely has a more like upside backup behind him that you can pick up if Richardson does go down, but hopefully he can. I would love to get to see a full season out of him. What can he be? Because we know, like, what do you think his ceiling is? Does he have the quarterback 1 overall ceiling, or would you max it out at like 3?
Well, I think here I'll ask a follow-up question to that. Now, do you think he could hit 808 on the ground, yards and touchdowns?
Yes, very easily. Well, not very easily, but yes. If he plays for 16 games, he'll hit that.
Okay, so you add that up. Quick math here, not to be too nerdy on you all, but 128 points right there. So that's a good chunk of points, right? 80 plus 48 from the touchdown. So when you look at that, that is awesome, right? To start with that baseline, that's what we call the floor is built in here for a player like Anthony Richardson. And then he has a big arm. We know that. And he has enough weapons. I wouldn't say his weapons are anywhere close to what CJ Stroud has. He has one main guy sorting out the tight ends. We'll see if Pierce or Mitchell or Downs can really step up as that number 2 receiver. So the weapons aren't great, but then you start looking at Lamar. It's like, are they really great behind Zay Flowers and Mark Andrews? They're still sorting things out there. So I look at Richardson. I think he could be the most dynamic runner and give you the highest floor in that capacity because he's young and he's working with Steichen. And then you can build on that. So you just have to kind of figure out, okay, if he gives you 800, is he going to give you 3,000 yards passing? Can you get that out of him? Then you're looking at a guy that can finish in the top 3.
It's going to be a fun season for him and the Colts. We're going to get into the Colts' top 2 weapons outside of Richardson and Jonathan Taylor and Michael Pittman Jr. right after this quick break. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by the Game Time app. Buying tickets to your favorite event shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you'll have. I have used this app so many times, and I can truly say it's always had my back. I've always felt confident using them, and I've always gotten the best price guaranteed while going through this app, whether it be for, baseball tickets, Steelers tickets, anything really I'm going to for entertainment. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. Get images of your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Buy tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps and you're set. And tickets are sent directly to your phone so you never have to dig through your email. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Terms do apply. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. I want to hit, I know Michael Pittman Jr., right, is going to be Anthony Richardson's top target here, most likely. But let's talk about this run game more, right? Because that's what we're so excited about with Anthony Richardson, his running game. And how much will Jonathan Taylor hurt or help Richardson? That will be interesting. But Jonathan Taylor right now is sitting at RB5 ADP. He's slowly moving up to RB4. So he's climbing these boards, 13th overall ADP. Last year, I mean, it was kind of a throwaway year for him mostly. He missed 8 games, including the first 4. Then when he finally started going, kind of got injured again. But he really started to take over this backfield at the end of the year. And from weeks 9 through 18, although he did miss some time in there, he did average the 4th most points per game among running backs over that second half of the season. So I'm excited about Jonathan Taylor in this offense. I think his cost is appropriate. What are your thoughts about him?
Yeah, it's been a rough couple years for Jonathan Taylor, right? We had the whole thing about taking him early, number 1. He was coming off the big year, then the injuries, and wasn't the return on investment. We got that out of Christian McCaffrey, obviously. If you took him number 1 last year, it turned out really well. But Taylor versus McCaffrey was a landslide just a couple years ago. Last year, Taylor was a very hard person to trust and draft, and we got fortunate if you had Zach Moss to bridge it until his return. So I think I look at Taylor and I'm glad that we're not talking about him too much. That says there's no drama. He's happy about the offense. He got paid what he wanted last year. And if Miles Sanders can have a huge season with Shane Steichen, and if you want to follow some of this related offense to Saquon Barkley, who's now playing with Kellen Moore, the Eagles, there's some big opportunity here. That's really the question. Do you look at Taylor? Do you look at Barkley? I think you go with Taylor because – again, maybe a little less durability risk now that, again, if you compare where they are health-wise, he might be a little bit better. And also the volume, where Barkley, I think they're going to manage the volume a little bit, not to overwork him there in Philadelphia, where I think they're not going to be afraid. They paid Jonathan Taylor. They paid Barkley too, but here, when you look at this, I think they want to ride him a little bit. That's what Shane Steichen wants to do, run the ball quite a bit with him and Richardson. So, and big drop off behind him. There's nobody of that level of Zach Moss there to take over. So I think it could be a big, big year for Taylor. And really, Michelle, I will say this. I'm not too concerned about Richardson stealing too much of his touchdowns because rushing touchdowns beget other rushing touchdowns. You got to worry about the zone read and all that. The place where I'm worried about Jonathan Taylor is the passing game because running quarterbacks tend to be their own check down and they run versus dumping it off to Taylor. But again, how much are we really expecting? We're not worried about that with Derrick Henry, right? Catching enough passes. Are you worried if Jonathan Taylor only catches like 35 to 40 balls? Probably not, right? He'll still be pretty efficient with that. So again, it's a preference here, but Taylor versus Barkley is going to be an interesting debate as we get closer.
Yeah, and it's not even a debate for me. It's easily Taylor. I'm excited for him this
Yeah.
season. His last 5 games last year, when he finally took over this backfield from Moss, 21.4 carries per game over those last 5 games, over 100 scrimmage yards per game. He scored 6 rushing touchdowns over those last 5 games. Like, Jonathan Taylor, we know, is one of the best pure rushers in the league. And even with him missing 13 games over the last 2 seasons, he still ranks second and tied for third in rushing yards and rushing touchdowns among running backs since 2021. And he's missed 13 games over the last 2 years. So as long as he can stay healthy, I think he easily hits this RB12. Like, I think he'll be a top 6 running back, most likely, which then I think his price is pretty fair at quarterback 5. Now, the big question, like you brought up, it's these 3 running backs going in a row, because Christian McCaffrey, Bijan Robinson, and Breece Hall are pretty much up there, locked in as the top 3 guys off the board. But then after that, there's a little gap, and it goes Jahmyr Gibbs, Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley, back to back to back. How would you rank those 3 guys? I mean, both of us have Taylor over Barkley, but what about Gibbs over Taylor?
Yeah, I think just going back to the first 3 you said, what separates them a little bit, we know they're going to have a big role in the pass game. McCaffrey, Hall, and Robinson, they're very talented in that area. Now, this group is the second tier. I mean, Derrick Henry doesn't have that role behind them. So when I look at this, I'm probably a Gibbs stan here. I love Gibbs. And I saw what he did the second half of last year, and this Lions team is headed for some big things again offensively with everything going on. So I'm most excited. If I was going to draft, I'd be most excited about Gibbs. But then I think I go Taylor, Barkley in that order. I just think Taylor is still going to maybe have more opportunities to score touchdowns. I think the Colts are going to be a better team this year with a chance to contend for a wild card because of some of their offensive abilities here. Their offensive line is very good, by the way. It's got now a left tackle in Bernard Raymond. So they've got everything shored up front for the Colts. So I love that. So I think to me, it's Taylor. I just trust him a little bit more than Saquon. I think Saquon can get pouty now he got paid, but I think Taylor is going to more be living up to that contract, right? I think that's just the nature of how he is. And I think he's going to feel settled for the first time. I think you're going to see the off the field kind of relaxation happen on the field.
Yeah, he got paid last year. He's going to be happy. Hopefully he can stay healthy. It's going to be a great year for him. Now, what about Michael Pittman Jr.? He is right now sitting at wide receiver 18 ADP, 29th overall. He finishes a wide receiver 15 overall last year, wide receiver 19 in points per game. So his cost is right pretty much with what he did last year. He gets the extension this offseason. And over the last 3 years, he actually has the highest rate of team receptions in the league. It goes Pittman Jr., Diggs, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and CeeDee Lamb as the top 4 guys for their teams. But his biggest issue has been scoring touchdowns. Only 15 career touchdowns on all of these receptions he's had. So is that all we need from Pittman for him to be an elite wide receiver, just the touchdowns? And we're going to be really, really happy with having him on our team?
Here's the funny thing. I mean, his size, kind of the big slot ability where you can line him up that way, it actually says he should have more touchdowns, right? So there should be an overall career positive touchdown regression with this guy at some point, and maybe just having the right connection with the quarterback. And he's gone through quite a few quarterbacks. I'll say this, like the stability has not always been there, and he's just tried to come through with whoever's out there. But if he's got Richardson, and also you look at Downs and A.D. Mitchell and Pierce, like there's going to be a sharp drop off. They're trying to still figure out who's the number 2 receiver on the outside. Yeah. So we know Pittman's going to dominate targets. The tight ends, they're figuring out if Jelani Woods or any of these guys are going to step up here for Richardson. So this guy's going to dominate targets. You're right. All it takes is a few touchdowns, and you're looking at a wide receiver 1 in the top 12. He finished 15 last year, so it doesn't take a lot to get him there. So I think wide receiver 18, I mean, if you're going to hype Richardson, right? If you're going to put him in the top 6, it's not just because of rushing, it's because he's going to find some way to produce in the passing game. And who better to do that than Pittman? So I think Pittman could have a real big season here. I mean, I think he's just coming into his own. He got paid. So I think there's still some upside with his ability. And again, he's not like a little dude, and it's going to be hard to score touchdowns. He's a nice size guy with big hands. the touchdowns are going to come. Like an Adam Thielen. I think it could really explode at one point like him.
Let me give you a really hard question here. He's going right ahead DJ Moore. I think I both know we take Michael Pittman over DJ Moore, but I'm going to give you a harder question. Brandon Ayuk is going 3 spots ahead of Michael Pittman Jr. Now, Brandon Ayuk destroyed Pittman in receiving yards last year on fewer targets. But which way would you go this season, Ayuk or Pittman?
This is a really tough one because Ayuk is a little bit big play dependent, right? He has to get the big plays to break his way. Now, Brock Purdy was great at delivering those balls downfield, but does that duplicate itself easily, right? Yards per catch. Can we count on those big plays consistently coming? Does the coverage shift, right, on the 49ers to say, okay, Debo's hard to cover, but we cannot allow these big plays to Ayuk downfield, and you change things up if you're trying to defend the 49ers, at least – make them sustain drives and go longer a little bit, right? Because Purdy was just so good throwing Ayuk downfield. So with Pittman, so it's a question of can you be patient and see the plays and yards come up? Now, I think volume-wise and touchdown-wise, that's where I think Pittman could have the edge with his catches and all that. But if Ayuk has any drop-off in the big play and not averaging 17 yards per catch or something like that, then it's going to start to balance out a little bit with Pittman, especially if he can score a few touchdowns. So I'm going with Pittman here over Ayuk just because I think he's going to be a little bit more consistent. And he clearly is the number one target on his team where we know there's Debo and George Kittle and McCaffrey and maybe a little bit of Juwan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall, right? So there's some guys that they're going to spread the ball around to where the Colts, they got to throw a lot to Michael Pittman this season.
I would really like Michael Pittman as my wide receiver 2 on my team. I'd feel really good about that. I wouldn't feel great about him as my wide receiver 1. I might feel better with Ayuk as my wide receiver 1 with the more upside in any given week. But yeah, if I'm taking my wide receiver 2, I feel really good about Pittman at that cost. Now, we have to get into the other Colts receivers in our final segment here because there should be some fantasy value outside of just Michael Pittman Jr. in the receiving game. They have Josh Downs coming into his second year, A.D. Mitchell, second round pick, and then I'm going to talk about Jelani Woods. I know you're throwing some shade on the tight ends here, but I'm a little bit interested, I'll say, in him this upcoming season.
Yeah, we'll get into all that in our final segment. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is sponsored and brought to you by BetterHelp. If you haven't given therapy a try, I highly recommend it because it's kind of giving you a roadmap or a GPS when you're lost a little bit. We can all kind of just lose our way, and especially maybe in the summer, a lot of things are going on with family and vacations, and those things can actually be more stressful than you think. And I've seen a therapist consistently for a while, and what they do is just put me at ease and just reset kind of. If I'm struggling a bit in my head, they just say, hey, it'll be okay. There's a way out of this. They show me the direction and how I can just kind of figure things out. And then if I get lost again, they're always there. So consider BetterHelp, online therapy, and therapists as your GPS and kind of your voice on your phone, like telling you where to go and how to kind of get you in the right way. So I do say that therapy is awesome. And again, if you've had the opportunity, but you're a little bit unsure here, well, online therapy is going to be safe for you because if you haven't tried it out, that's a good place to think about and start BetterHelp here. So give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule, so it works out however you would like. Just fill out a brief questionnaire, then you'll get matched with a licensed therapist. If it doesn't work, you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So they'll make sure that you have the right fit and the right person to guide you through life here. So stop comparing and start focusing with a BetterHelp. Just focus on yourself here. Good time to do it in the summer. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com to go check it out now. betterhelp.com/lockedon. Before we dive into our final segment here, looking at the other Colts wide receivers, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, let's quickly run down the Colts' other receivers. They added, as Michelle mentioned, A.D. Mitchell out of her school, Texas, in the second round, and kind of slipped behind his teammate Xavier Worthy in the draft. You're looking at Josh Downs, however, he's gone as wide receiver 61. Right behind him is A.D. Mitchell, wide receiver 65. One is 143, one is 155. So again, these are kind of the dart throws that you look at here. Maybe these sleepers on other teams, these number twos, these number threes. What do you expect out of Downs and Mitchell, kind of in the pecking order behind Pittman this year, Michelle?
Yeah, it's hard looking at Josh Downs' year last year. He's wide receiver 47 overall. He had a pretty solid first half of his rookie season, which is weird for rookies. Normally it's a better second half, but was averaging nearly 60 receiving yards per game from weeks 1 through 8. Then he suffered a knee injury early in week 9. And from there, I mean, he was playing through it, but he was averaging 33 receiving yards per game after that injury. So we'll see what happens. And then they did add a wide receiver in the second round. So clearly they felt like they wanted to upgrade the wide receiver too, or maybe they just wanted to upgrade from Alec Pierce. We'll see. Looking at like the receivers that Anthony Richardson targeted while he was there, it went Pittman first, Kyle Granson second with 14 targets, and then Josh Downs 13. Really no other wide receiver saw anything else besides Pittman or Downs from Anthony Richardson. I'm okay taking a shot on him. I like Josh Downs' talent. I like if they use him as a deep threat. He's going so late. He's going in between Gabe Davis and Jahan Dotson and Dontavian Wicks. Like out of those four group of guys, or really anyone around Downs, like I like taking the shot on Downs. I really don't have any desire for A.D. Mitchell. I didn't like him in college. And when I don't like you in college, I'm not going to hope you get better in the NFL.
Yeah, and Mitchell is in a little bit of battle with Alec Pierce. I know Pierce is kind of disappointed as well, but maybe an opportunity to be kind of the bigger, speedy, deep threat they're looking for. But how do we look at Shane Steichen's offense from Philadelphia? We kind of had Michael Pittman against was loosely the A.J. Brown, the big target with the body that you can put. And Devonta Smith, we know had some versatility. Now, can Josh Downs carve out the Devonta Smith role? Because we know Shane Steichen wasn't really getting much from the third receiver in Philadelphia. It was pretty much these two guys, an occasional Dallas Goedert game in the field that will lead to something we'll talk about here in a few moments. But when you look at it, Josh Downs, I think he's the better talent. I think he's the guy that you can get in the open field, put the ball in his hands. He's quick. I loved him in North Carolina. And Michelle's right. You got to think about these guys in college. I mean, Alec Pierce was pretty much a field stretcher with Desmond Ridder in Cincinnati. You had A.D. Mitchell, clearly was out kind of trained by Worthy, right, in the draft process, his teammate at Texas. So I do feel best about Josh Downs being a weapon. He was all over the field making plays for Sam Howell, the Tar Heels, and I think he's undervalued here. And I think they need to get that second receiver involved. So if there's a flyer I'm going to take on a second Colts receiver, it's going to clearly be Josh Downs here. And you look at some of the players that are going around him, Gabe Davis, Jahan Dotson, might have a little bit more upside. Dotson as a first rounder on the team with Terry McLaurin on the other side. Davis might be a little bit big play dependent. They have a few actually mouths to feed in Jacksonville. And Dontavian Wicks, we're not sure how he fits behind kind of Jane Reed and Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson right there. So Josh Downs is a much better path to have targets behind his guy than some of these other guys. So I do like him as a flyer. And again, I have no interest in A.D. Mitchell. We'll have to see. He has to show me a lot, but as a rookie, I'm writing him off.
Yeah, me too. We'll see. Maybe I'm dead wrong about him, but he's not going to be on any of my teams if he, starts having some solid games early on in his rookie season or halfway through or whatever. Maybe we reevaluate. But I'm willing to be wrong on that one and just kind of bypass there. With Jelani Woods, the reason I'm interested in him, it's the tiniest sample size of all time. But Anthony Richardson last year targeted tight ends on 30% of his pass attempts. Now it's only on 84 pass attempts that we have that 30%. So it's really tiny. But that was the sixth highest rate among all quarterbacks last year. And we know Shane Steichen with the Eagles, it's like the one time Dallas Goedert had a good fantasy season. So I do think that Jelani Woods will be involved here. Now, this is me taking a guess on Jelani Woods and not one of the other 1,000 tight ends that the Colts have, but he is the projected starter. He was their third round pick in 2022. His rookie numbers weren't anything crazy, 312 yards, 3 touchdowns, but he missed the entire year last year due to hamstring injuries. And so he didn't play at all. So when you're like, well, where was he last season? He wasn't there. And that's why these other guys were all kind of just I mean, they used them all, right? They used Granson and Ogletree and Mo Alley Cox, and two of Richardson's passing touchdowns last year, 2 of his 3 passing touchdowns, they went to tight ends, 1 to Ogletree, 1 to Mo Alley Cox. Like, I do think Jelani Woods will be used, and in deep dynasty leagues, like I'm trying to pick him up. You're not going to draft him in normal leagues, but if in week 1 he comes out, has 60 yards and a touchdown, he's going to be a waiver wire priority for me because I believe that he's going to keep being used the rest of the year. So this is just a guy I'm keeping an eye on. And then dynasty leagues, especially tight end premium leagues, I'm trying to trade for him now while he's dead cheap.
The Colts have been like a wild tight end, right? I'll say they had remember back in the day, Kobe Fleener and Dwayne Allen. We're trying to figure out those 2 guys with Andrew Luck, and then we had that random big touchdown year from Eric Ebron. Then we had Jack Doyle, not being exciting, but it's produced. And now we're back with this Mo Alley Cox, Colin Ransom, Jelani Woods, and all these guys that they put in the mix at this position, including Will Mallory, right? He's been thrown in this mix as well. So it's just been hard to get something consistent really out of Colts running or tight end for multiple seasons, probably since like Dallas Clark. And it's been very frustrating. But I think Woods has a chance. He's a pretty athletic guy, a little bit of hybrid receiver. It kind of reminds me of Jatavion Sanders on a poor man's level in terms of the athleticism. I'm not saying he's going to push that level, but he has that little wide receiver hybrid to his game, right? So, again, we have to see. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity. That's the thing we know on this team. I mean, it's Pittman and anybody else, any of these young receivers that wants to step up and be a key target for their second-year quarterback, he's going to be here. He's going to be here for it. Shane Steichen's going to want it as well. So, anybody can break out, but you're right. Woods is the guy I would watch. I mean, kind of forgotten, man. He's super cheap. Just watch him. He might have some value on the waiver wire. It'll be something that we want to see develop because I think there's going to be a lot more value than just Michael Pittman on his team in the passing game.
Absolutely. So I think if both of us had to put, some money down on the second target on this team, it's Josh Downs. But you never know, and there's opportunity for any of these guys to break out. So just keep a close eye on them, especially during training camp. We should learn a bit more and during preseason games, so that will be fun to watch. That is it for today's show. Thank you to you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Every day is Vinnie and I will be back with our next episode talking about the Jacksonville Jaguars and Vinnie's favorite love of his quarterback, Trevor Lawrence. It'll be a great time. Don't miss it. Bye, y'all.